When to use before versus after triggers. The most commonly asked question in Apex history. Let's put this mystery to rest. This is a timeline of a database event. And by database event, I mean any changes made to your Salesforce database, such as a record being created, edited, or deleted. The record save milestone here is the moment the database event happens for records in trigger.new. Before triggers are run before this milestone, and after triggers simply run after. Let's look at the pros and cons of each type of trigger. When using before triggers, you do not need to explicitly save your work because records entering your trigger, aka records in trigger.new, are going to inevitably hit the save milestone shortly after your trigger finishes. Explicitly saving your work inside a before trigger would be redundant. You'd save your work, then Salesforce would just save it again. This would be extremely inefficient since many other things run during a save event, such as workflow rules, validation rules, and other triggers. So don't even bother doing a save on records entering your before trigger because Salesforce will get mad at you. A con of before triggers is that some fields have not yet been populated by Salesforce. So if you try to use them, you're not going to be getting the latest and greatest values. Luckily, this only happens for certain system-level fields, so the vast majority of fields that you do want to use have the most up-to-date values. Which brings us to the pros of after triggers. Salesforce populates certain system-level fields during the record save milestone, which means that the latest values of these fields are now available for you to use in your after triggers. Common examples of these system fields are the record ID, created date, and last modified date values. By far, the most important of these fields, and the main reason you'll ever want to go out of your way to use an after trigger, is the record ID. If you have a trigger that runs whenever a record is inserted, such as our Apple Watch trigger, you'll want to use an after trigger because after a record is inserted, its ID is created and thus available to use. A con of after triggers is that since they run after the save milestone for records in trigger.new, you have to explicitly save any work you do in your trigger. No upcoming save event is going to do this for you. Because you have to explicitly save your work in after triggers, sometimes you can create scenarios where your trigger runs, it does a save event, which subsequently runs your trigger again, which does another save event, and soon you have an infinite loop. I know we just covered a ton of information and your brain may need some time to process it all. So here's the golden rule to follow when you're unsure what to do. When in doubt, use a before trigger. You'll be right 95% of the time. And if you're wrong, just change it to after.